My husband pleaded with me not to attend his law school graduation.
Why?
I asked. He sneered. I don't want anyone knowing you're just a waitress. Then, cold as ice, he said, I'll tell them you're dead. Don't ever reach out again. I walked away in tears. Years later, on his wedding day, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, his mother, his bride, everyone demanding, what happened? Don't come to my graduation. I don't want people knowing you're just a waitress. Those words didn't just break my heart. They made me question if the man I married had ever truly seen me at all. But what happened next? Oh, what happened next was so much worse. It was 2 weeks before Samuel's law school graduation.
2 weeks.
I'd been planning for this day for months. I'd already cleared my schedule at the Riverside Diner, picked out the nicest dress I owned, a simple navy blue one, secondhand but dry cleaned for the occasion. I had pictured it so clearly, sitting in that audience, beaming, watching my husband walk across the stage, receiving the law degree I'd helped pay for with every tip, every extra shift, every night my feet literally bled. But he didn't want me there. Not because of limited seating, not some scheduling conflict.
No.
He didn't want me there because I was just a waitress. And that, he said, embarrassed him in front of his classmates, kids whose families were judges, lawyers, people who mattered. Just a waitress, I repeated, the words tasting like bitter ash in my mouth. Is that what I am to you now? He finally looked up from his phone, and the coldness in his eyes chilled me to the bone. There was no warmth, no flicker of recognition for the 3 years we'd been married, the 6 years I'd spent pouring every ounce of myself into supporting his dreams while my own gathered dust in a forgotten box under our bed. Haley, be realistic, he sighed, as if I were a foolish child. Everyone there will be from families with money and status. I can't have them meeting you and wondering why I married someone who serves pancakes for a living. In that instant, it hit me. I had been erased from his life long before he ever dared to speak those words out loud. But let me take you back to where the story actually begins, to the place I spent most of my waking hours for 6 years, to the life I thought meant something, before Samuel reduced it to an embarrassment he needed to hide. The Riverside Diner.
You know the type.
That permanent smell of bacon grease and coffee left too long on the burner. Vinyl booths cracked and patched with duct tape. A jukebox in the corner, forever stuck on the Eagles and Fleetwood Mac. It wasn't glamorous, but for 6 years, that diner was my kingdom. I knew every inch of it, every wobbly table leg that needed a napkin, every coffee pot quirk, the exact 3-second grind of the ice machine. More than that, I knew the people. I knew every regular's order before they opened their mouths. Professor Hrick's black coffee, 2 sugars, exactly $2 folded under his cup at the 3rd booth. The lost university students camping out for hours, debating constitutional law and criminal procedure over single cups of coffee. They never looked up, never said thank you, never learned my name, even though I wore a name tag every single shift. To them, I was just part of the furniture, as invisible as the chipped tables and flickering lights. But to me, my coworkers became family. Maria, who could read customers like an open book, teaching me to handle the rude ones with a smile that never quite reached my eyes. Devin, scrubbing dishes in the back while studying business management, telling me, every job teaches you something valuable if you pay attention. People who look down on service work have no idea how much skill and endurance it takes. And old Joe, the cook, who communicated mostly in grunts, but always knew when I needed an extra slice of pie or his special mac and cheese, no questions asked. Just silent understanding. This work exhausted me, a bone-deep ache no Epsom salts could cure. My feet bled, my hands smelled perpetually of coffee, and I learned to smile through rudeness.
But there was dignity in it.
A value the outside world, with its college degrees and salary brackets, refused to acknowledge. I showed up, I worked hard, I took pride in doing it well. I made sure coffee cups stayed full and orders came out right, even if customers never learned my name. I met Samuel Thornton 3 years ago, right there in the diner. He came in late one Tuesday during finals, looking absolutely drained. He was in a back booth, counting out change to see if he could afford coffee and food. Something in him, reminded me of my struggling younger brother. So I brought him coffee and a grilled cheese, told him it was a mistake order that would go to waste. It was a lie. I paid for it out of my tips. He looked up with such genuine gratitude, and we started talking. He told me about law school, the pressure, the competition, the fear he wasn't smart or connected enough. I told him about the strange satisfaction of making someone's day a little better with good food and friendly service. We talked until my shift ended, then he walked me to the bus stop, out of his way. Within a month, we were dating. 6 months later, we were married at the courthouse, with Maria and Devin as our witnesses. We couldn't afford a fancy wedding, or even a nice dinner. But we were young, in love, and convinced our feelings could overcome anything. Those early months felt like a true partnership. We lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, furniture from thrift stores, mismatched dishes. We'd fall asleep tangled on our secondhand couch, too tired for the bedroom. We whispered about the future, about him opening his own practice, defending people who couldn't afford lawyers, using his education to help people. I believed him. I wanted to believe we shared the same values, the same understanding of hard work and meaning. I supported him in every way I knew how. When his student loans were delayed, I covered rent with my tip money, wearing my old shoes until the soles wore through. When he needed expensive textbooks and bar prep materials, I picked up extra shifts, went without new clothes for a year, my winter coat zipper broken while his study materials arrived on time. When he was stressed, I kept the apartment quiet, worked evening shifts so he could study uninterrupted. I bought his favorite foods, even when money was tight, thinking small comforts mattered. I genuinely believed I was investing in our future, that his success would be our success. We were a team. I can see now how wrong I was. But back then, I worked until my feet literally bled. Nights, I'd peel off my socks to find burst blisters, my shoes stained pink with diluted blood. I'd clean and tape them, put the same shoes back on because I couldn't afford to miss work and I couldn't afford new ones. The shift in how Samuel treated me started so gradually, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Somewhere in his second year of law school, things began to change in small ways that accumulated into something larger, more damaging. He stopped introducing me as his wife at law school events. "This is Haley," he'd say, with no context. At first, I thought maybe he assumed people knew. But then I noticed him quickly changing the subject, steering conversations away from us. When someone asked what I did, Samuel would jump in before I could answer, vague about boring day jobs versus legal theory. He stopped inviting me to study groups at our apartment, scheduling them during my dinner shifts. When I offered to change my hours, he said it was fine. I'd probably be bored anyway. I accepted his explanations because the alternative was too painful to acknowledge. He began erasing me from his personal narrative. I discovered this by accident one evening. I'd stopped by the law library to drop off the lunch he'd forgotten. I overheard him talking to 2 classmates. One asked if he was doing anything with his girlfriend. "Oh, probably just studying," Samuel said. "Don't really have time for a relationship with law school demands." I stood frozen in the doorway, invisible to them, holding his forgotten lunch, listening to him pretend I didn't exist. I confronted him that night. He claimed I'd misunderstood, that he just meant he didn't have time for a normal relationship. He was under enormous pressure, couldn't worry about how he phrased things. I let it go. I wanted peace more than truth. But the erasure intensified. He stopped posting pictures of us on social media. His Instagram, his Facebook, curated images of him at law school, studying in coffee shops, presenting the image of a serious, dedicated student with no distractions. When I asked why, he said social media was superficial. He needed to maintain a professional image for future employers. He stopped mentioning me to professors or at networking events. I knew this because occasionally, a classmate would come into the diner, and when I mentioned being Samuel's wife, they'd look confused, saying, "I didn't know he was married." Each time, something inside me cracked a little further. I made excuses.
He's stressed.
Law school pressure. But deep down, something cold and certain was growing in my chest. I was becoming invisible in my own marriage. My husband was systematically erasing me from his life while I was still living in it. Now, standing in our apartment, Samuel's cruel words still echoing, I understood the erasure was complete. I wasn't just invisible. According to Samuel, I wasn't supposed to exist at all. The waitress who supported him, who worked until her feet bled, who sacrificed her own dreams for his education, that woman was just an embarrassment he needed to hide from people who mattered. Just a waitress, I whispered again, the words like ashes. Samuel stood from the couch, pocketing his phone. I'm glad you understand. The ceremony is invitation only anyway, so it's not like you were really going to be able to attend. That was a lie. I'd seen the graduation info. Family members were welcome. But what was the point? He'd already decided I wasn't family. Not worthy of being seen with him. I need to get back to studying, he said, walking towards our bedroom. He paused in the doorway. Oh, and Haley, I've been telling people you died a few years ago. So if anyone ever asks, just don't contact me. It's cleaner that way. He closed the door. The click of the lock. My entire world collapsed around me like a building with a faulty foundation, finally giving way to gravity and truth. The Thursday night meatloaf on the coffee table grew cold, congealing. I stood there, frozen, staring at that closed door. The apartment felt suffocating. Samuel had just told me he'd been informing people I was dead, then walked off to study as if he'd simply mentioned a change in his class schedule. My legs wobbled. I sank onto the couch, where moments before he'd delivered his verdict. I pressed my palm against the worn fabric, feeling nothing but old foam and springs that had lost their tension. I needed to understand. How do you tell people your wife is dead while she's still making your meals and paying half the rent? I walked to the bedroom door, knocked softly, then harder. Samuel, we need to finish this conversation. There's nothing to finish. His voice, muffled but clear. I have a contracts exam on Monday. I need to study. I opened the door anyway. He sat at our small second-hand desk, laptop open, textbooks neatly stacked. He didn't turn around. You can't just tell me you've been pretending I'm dead and then go study for an exam. He sighed, that exasperated exhale that implied I was being unreasonable. Haley, I already explained this. Everyone at graduation will be from families that matter. Lawyers, judges, business owners. These are people who can help my career. Having them meet you would raise questions about my judgment. My judgment. I repeated, the words foreign in my mouth. What exactly would they question? That you married someone who works hard, someone who supported you through school. He finally turned.
His face was a mask.
They would question why I married someone who serves pancakes for a living. Why I chose someone with no education, no prospects, no connections that could benefit me professionally. Each word landed with surgical precision, designed to inflict maximum pain. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was rehearsed, deliberate. I helped pay for your degree, I whispered, hating how my voice shook. I worked double so you could afford textbooks, bar prep. I covered rent. I sacrificed so you could focus. And I appreciate that, Samuel said, in that tone people use when they don't appreciate something at all. But appreciation doesn't change reality. The legal profession is about connections and image. I can't build the career I want while being associated with someone whose greatest accomplishment is remembering how people take their coffee. The casual dismissal of my entire existence. It burned worse than hatred. Hatred, at least, acknowledges you matter enough to inspire strong feelings. This was colder. A calculation. I had served my purpose, and now I was a liability to be eliminated. So, you told people I died. I said it as a statement, needing to hear it again, to make it real. Yes. He turned back to his laptop, already done. When people asked about family or my personal life, I told them, my wife passed away a few years ago in an accident. It was the simplest explanation. Simplest for who? For everyone. He clicked something on his screen. It generated sympathy, which helped in some situations. Explained why no one had met you. And it avoided awkward questions about why I was married to someone inappropriate for my social circle. Inappropriate. 3 years of marriage, reduced to a single adjective. I wasn't good enough. Never had been. Never would be. When did you start telling people this? My voice sounded distant. Around the middle of second year, he said casually, like discussing a new study method. That's when networking became more important and people started asking more personal questions. Second year. That was 18 months ago. For 18 months, Samuel had been walking around as a widower while I served coffee and cleared plates to pay our bills. For 18 months, people had offered him sympathy for a loss that never happened, while I ached from double shifts so he could study without financial stress. Does anyone know the truth? I asked. Does anyone in your entire law school world know I exist? He hesitated. That pause told me everything. A few people from first year met you briefly, but most of them transferred, or we lost touch. No one who matters knows you are real. No one who matters knows you are real. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. I was standing right there, breathing, speaking, existing in 3 dimensions. But according to Samuel, I wasn't real because the people who could advance his career didn't know about me. This is insane, I said. You understand that, right? This is not normal behavior. Normal is relative. Samuel closed his laptop. He gave me his full attention, which somehow made everything worse. In my world, having the right connections and maintaining the right image is normal. Essential, actually. You come from a different world, Haley, where those things don't matter. But in my profession, they matter more than almost anything else. More than honesty? More than the person who supported you through school. Yes, he said, without hesitation, without shame. More than those things. I need you to understand something, Haley. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to build the kind of career most people only dream about. And I cannot do that while dragging around someone who represents everything I am trying to move beyond. Everything you are trying to move beyond? I echoed. You mean poverty? Working class jobs? The kind of life I live?
Yes, exactly that.
He stood up. He seemed taller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just shrunk. I grew up poor, Haley. I know what it's like to be looked down on, dismissed. I worked incredibly hard to get into law school. I am not going to waste that opportunity by staying connected to a life that will hold me back. I am not a life. I am a person. I am your wife. Not for much longer. He walked past me, pulled a duffel bag from a closet. I think it would be better if you stayed somewhere else tonight. I need to focus on studying, and this conversation is not productive. I watched him pack my clothes, shoving them in without care. My favorite sweater. The jeans from our first date. A dress I'd bought for his law school formal, which he'd told me last minute not to attend. Samuel, we need to talk about this properly. You can't just erase someone from your life. He zipped the bag and held it out to me. I already have. And I need you to accept that and move on. Don't come to graduation. Don't contact me at school or work. If anyone ever asks, tell them we were never married. Tell them you have me confused with someone else. Just stay away. What about the apartment? Our things. I'll handle the apartment.
Take what you need tonight.
I'll have the rest sent wherever you end up. He pulled out his phone. I'm texting you my sister's address. You can stay there tonight if you need to. Your sister knows about this? Emma knows we're separating. She doesn't need to know the details. He set the duffel bag at my feet like he was dismissing a servant. I'm going to continue studying now. Please be gone when I come back out. He walked back into the bedroom and closed the door. I heard the lock click into place. I stood there, duffel bag in hand, looking around the apartment we'd shared for 3 years. The second-hand couch where we used to fall asleep. The coffee table with the congealing meatloaf. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals. The bathroom where I'd soaked my bleeding feet. None of it had ever been ours. It had been his, and I'd just been borrowing space until he decided I was no longer useful. I called my sister, Emma. Can you come get me? My voice was steadier than I felt. I need somewhere to stay tonight. Emma didn't ask questions. She just said she'd be there in 20 minutes and told me to wait outside. I grabbed the duffel bag and walked out without looking back. The hallway smelled of garlic and tomatoes. Normal life continuing normally for people whose worlds weren't collapsing. I waited on the front steps, the evening air cool. I hadn't thought to grab a jacket. Cars passed. People walked by, heading home to lives that made sense. I felt hollowed out, scooped clean, leaving just a shell that looked like Haley but contained only emptiness. Emma pulled up in her old Honda. I climbed into the passenger seat. She looked at me, at the duffel bag, at my face that must have shown everything. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "He told people I died," I said. "And then he told me to leave." Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything else. She just drove. I watched the city lights blur, thinking about how you can be alive and dead at the same time. How you can exist and not exist, depending on who's telling the story. At Emma's, she brought me tea I didn't drink and sat with me while I stared at the wall. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked. I shook my head. Talking required energy I didn't have, explanations for things I didn't understand. "Okay," she said. "I'll be in the next room if you need anything. Anything at all." After she left, I lay on the bed, fully clothed. Somewhere across town, Samuel was studying for his contracts exam, probably relieved to have me gone. Probably already planning how to maintain his fiction of being a tragic widower. And I was here, officially erased, but inconveniently still breathing, trying to figure out how to exist in a world where the person who promised to love me had decided I was better off dead. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later, slid under Emma's door in a manila envelope with no return address. I found them on a Tuesday morning. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table. My hands no longer shook. Grief had transformed during those 3 weeks, hardening from something fluid and overwhelming into something clearer and more solid. The papers inside were exactly what I expected. Petition for dissolution of marriage, irreconcilable differences due to lifestyle disparity. That bloodless legal phrase reduced 3 years of my life to a bureaucratic checkbox. I signed them that afternoon with a pen Emma kept in a drawer. My signature looked small, unfamiliar. I mailed them back that same day, telling the clerk, no tracking needed. There was nothing inside worth tracking. Within a week, I'd moved into a studio apartment above a used bookstore. The rent was cheaper, and Mr. Chin, the landlord, asked no questions. The floors slanted, the radiator clanked, but the windows faced east. Every morning, the sunrise painted the walls in golden pink, making the space feel less like an ending and more like a beginning. I furnished it slowly, with thrift store finds. A reading chair, a small wobbly table, mismatched dishes, plants I kept alive through sheer determination. Each purchase felt like reclaiming territory, building something that belonged only to me, with no ghosts of failed partnership haunting the corners. I returned to work at Riverside Diner the Monday after I signed the divorce papers. Walking through that door felt both familiar and strange, like returning as someone completely different. Maria was wiping the counter. She looked up, no pity, just solid understanding. "You back for good?" she asked. "Yeah, I am back." She nodded, handed me a clean apron. "Table 6 needs coffee. Couple at the window booth are ready to order." That was it. No intrusive questions. Just the routine of work, requiring my attention, giving my hands and mind something concrete to do. I tied the apron, picked up the coffee pot. For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Maria noticed the dark circles under my eyes, but never pressed for details. She just made sure I ate, appearing with toast or soup extra from a canceled order. When I needed a moment in the bathroom, she covered my tables without comment. Her kindness was practical, unobtrusive. Devin, working the weekend shift, his hands red from hot water, said, "Every single dish starts out dirty, but if you keep scrubbing, eventually it comes clean. Nothing stays ruined forever if you put in the work." I looked at this 20-year-old kid, realizing he understood more about resilience than most people twice his age. "That's a good philosophy," I said. He grinned. "Yeah, well, dishes teach you things if you pay attention. Patience, mostly. and that a fresh start is always possible. Old Joe started making my favorite comfort foods without being asked. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, his special mac and cheese, warm pie with extra whipped cream. These people saw me. They valued my work, my presence, in ways that had nothing to do with who I was married to or what credentials I held. They measured worth differently than Samuel's world did. For the first time in years, I felt visible. And that visibility was healing. Emma checked in regularly, showing up with groceries I hadn't asked for and wine I definitely needed. She never said, "I told you so," even though she had every right. She'd met Samuel 3 times, and each time, she'd had observations she'd kept mostly to herself. "He looks at other people at parties like he's shopping," she'd once mentioned. "Like he's always scanning for someone more interesting or useful." I defended him then. But Emma had been right. She'd noticed the careful curation of his social media, his transformation into a serious student with no complications. Now, she just showed up with takeout from my favorite Thai place, and we'd sit at my wobbling table, watching terrible reality TV, her sarcastic commentary making me laugh until I cried. And in those moments, I remembered that not everyone I loved had betrayed me. Some bonds survived, even when others shattered. I developed routines that were entirely mine. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. Sunday evenings browsing the bookstore downstairs. I read novels, memoirs about survival. Slowly, I began to understand that my life wasn't over. Just different. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall. I worked my shifts, came home to my small apartment, building a life that was modest but honestly mine. I wasn't happy, not exactly, but I was stable. And stability felt like an achievement after months of emotional freefall. Then came the morning that changed everything again.
A Tuesday.
8 months after the divorce. I was on breakfast shift, refilling coffee. 2 law students sat in the corner booth, the same one where Samuel used to study. They were deep in conversation. "Did you get your invitation to Samuel Thornton's wedding?" one asked. My hand froze mid-pour. Coffee slopped over the rim. I set the pot down, pretending to wipe a spill while my heart hammered. "Yeah, it looks like it's going to be huge," the other student replied. "His fiancée's family is apparently spending a fortune. Her dad is that appellate judge, right? Judge Ashford. Victoria Ashford. Can you imagine landing someone like that?" Samuel really upgraded from that tragic backstory he had going. The whole dead wife thing.
They laughed.
The sound cut through me like broken glass. I finished wiping the table and walked back to the kitchen on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Victoria Ashford. Daughter of an appellate judge. Exactly the kind of pedigree Samuel had been cultivating. The exact opposite of a waitress who embarrassed him. He hadn't just left me. He had upgraded. Traded authenticity for advantage. Swapped the woman who supported him through law school for someone whose connections could advance his career. And he was getting married, celebrating this new partnership, while still telling people his first wife had died tragically years ago. I finished my shift, moving automatically, my mind spinning. When my shift ended, I walked home slowly, through the park, leaves crunching underfoot. Back in my apartment, I sat at my wobbling table and stared at my laptop. I hadn't searched for Samuel since the divorce. I'd been trying to move forward. But now I needed to know. What story was he telling? What version of reality had he constructed around my erasure? I typed his name into the search bar. What I found made something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. Not jealousy, but a darker form of clarity. Almost like purpose taking shape. Samuel's Instagram profile loaded. The first photo, him at a charity gala, tailored suit I knew he couldn't have afforded when we were married. Victoria Ashford beside him, hand elegantly on his arm. Both smiling with the easy confidence of people who never scrubbed floors or counted coins for groceries. I scrolled. More photos. Samuel at a legal conference, name tag identifying him as an associate at Morrison & Wells, a prestigious firm. Samuel and Victoria at a vineyard, wine glasses raised against a professionally shot sunset. Samuel alone in his new office, law books artfully arranged. but it was the captions that made my hand shake. Under the charity gala photo, he'd written about gratitude for second chances and honoring those we have lost by living fully. The comments were full of heart emojis, supportive messages. So inspiring to see you finding happiness again after such devastating loss. I clicked an older post 6 months ago. Samuel alone on a beach, back to the camera, looking out at the ocean. 3 years ago today, I lost my best friend and partner. The grief never fully leaves, but I've learned that carrying love forward is the greatest tribute we can offer those who shaped us. She would want me to keep building the life we dreamed about together. Over 100 comments. People sharing their own stories of loss. Thanking him for being vulnerable. Praising his strength. One partner at his law firm commented on his resilience in the face of personal tragedy. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger, but something more dangerous calculated. Samuel hadn't just told a few people I was dead. He'd constructed an entire public mythology around my fictional death, complete with anniversary posts and philosophical reflections. My erasure had become performance art, carefully staged, widely applauded. I found an article from the alumni magazine, Rising Star, How Personal Tragedy Shaped One Graduate's Approach to Justice. It opened with a photo of Samuel in his office. The text described his remarkable journey through law school, balancing academic excellence with the emotional weight of losing his spouse during his first year. I read slowly, my pulse accelerating. Samuel described our marriage as a beautiful but brief chapter, cut short by circumstances he preferred not to detail out of respect for her memory. He claimed the loss taught him about the fragility of life and the importance of fighting for justice on behalf of people who could no longer fight for themselves. He said his late wife had always believed in helping others, and her memory motivated him to pursue civil rights law. None of it was true. He had talked constantly about money, about lifestyle. I had no particular philosophy beyond basic human decency. But the interviewer had eaten it up. He'd created an entire digital memorial to a version of me that had never existed. A saintly dead wife whose loss made him more sympathetic, more admirable, more hireable. Every post generated dozens of supportive comments. Every public display of grief earned him social capital that translated directly into professional opportunities. Then I found the engagement announcement, 2 months old, posted on his and Victoria's profiles. A photo of them on a yacht. Victoria's left hand displayed prominently, an engagement ring probably worth more than I made in 6 months. The caption spoke of finding love again after loss, grateful for second chances, honoring the past while embracing the future. Victoria's parents commented. His colleagues wrote supportive messages, all threaded with the narrative of the tragic widower who suffered, healed, and now deserved his happy ending. I clicked on Victoria's profile. Equally curated. Charity events, gallery openings, weekend trips. She was beautiful, polished, poised. Her bio mentioned work at a non-profit, passion for criminal justice reform. She had several glowing posts about Samuel. His strength in the face of tragedy inspired me to live more fully. Honored to be chosen by someone who understood the preciousness of love because he had lost it once before. She had no idea. Victoria Ashford, daughter of an appellate judge, dedicated to justice and reform, had no idea she was marrying a man who had casually erased his living wife because she embarrassed him. She thought she was getting the grieving widower who had transformed pain into purpose. She had no idea she was getting the man who told me I was better off dead than sitting in his graduation audience. I closed the laptop, sat in the darkness of my studio. Samuel hadn't just told a convenient lie. He'd built an entire professional identity on the foundation of my fictional death. Every connection, every job opportunity, every expression of sympathy and admiration, contaminated by this fundamental deception. He had weaponized my erasure, turning it into social capital. The unfairness of it was staggering. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of friendship and support. Worked until my feet bled. Sacrificed my own dreams. And he repaid me by killing me off and using my corpse as a stepping stone. But what struck me most wasn't just what he had done to me. It was what he was doing to everyone else. Victoria thought she was marrying someone honest and emotionally mature. His colleagues thought they were elevating someone whose character had been tested by tragedy. His clients would trust him because they believed his personal suffering made him compassionate. All of them were being deceived, and none of them knew it. I stood up, walked to the window. A couple walked past, holding hands. Normal life. Continuing normally. While I stood here, holding knowledge that could detonate through Samuel's carefully constructed world like a bomb. Some lies are too big to let stand unchallenged. Some betrayals demand a response. Not because revenge heals anything, but because silence becomes complicity. I thought about Victoria walking down the aisle towards a man she didn't truly know. About Samuel's colleagues trusting him based on fiction. About all the people who would celebrate him at his wedding next weekend, applauding a monster. This wasn't about making Samuel suffer, though I wouldn't pretend that thought held no appeal. This was about refusing to stay dead. About resurrecting the truth, just enough to crack the carefully polished surface he had spent months building. This was about giving Victoria and everyone else in Samuel's fabricated world a chance to see who he really was, before they invested any more trust and respect in someone who didn't deserve it. I opened my laptop again, created a new, anonymous email. Then I started researching wedding venues, guest lists, contact information for key people in Samuel's professional and personal life. Methodically, taking notes in a notebook bought specifically for this. Building a careful architecture of truth that would deploy at exactly the right moment. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I had a plan. And for the first time since Samuel told me not to come to his graduation, I felt something other than grief or confusion. I felt purpose.
Clear. Cold. Certain.
Like ice forming on a winter lake. The notebook lay open on my kitchen table the next morning. Names, numbers, details. My coffee went cold again. I was building something precise, a structure of truth that would stand on its own. Victoria's social media had given me the wedding venue, Riverside Manor, an upscale property 30 miles outside the city, full of manicured gardens and crystal chandeliers. I spent Tuesday morning cross-referencing social media tags and law firm directories, mapping out who would be there. Victoria's parents, Judge Richard Ashford and his wife Catherine, were easy to find. Samuel's law firm partners too. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a spreadsheet of 30 key people, their contact information. Victoria's family office manager, the wedding coordinator, Samuel's direct supervisor, Victoria's maid of honor, an assistant district attorney. Each name, a point of contact, a place where truth could be planted. I made my first call Thursday morning. My hands were steady. When the wedding coordinator at Riverside Manor answered with professional cheerfulness, my voice was calm, pleasant. Hi, this is Haley Thornton. I'm calling to follow up on some billing details for the Thornton-Ashford wedding this Saturday. A brief pause. I'm sorry, could you repeat your name? Haley Thornton, Samuel's wife. I just wanted to confirm that the payment arrangements have been finalized correctly. The pause lengthened. I heard shuffling, a mouse click. I'm showing the primary contacts for this event as Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford. Are you a member of the wedding party? I am his wife, I said again, letting the words hang. Is there a problem with the account? No, no problem at all. I just need to verify some information. Can you hold for one moment? I held for 3 minutes, listening to elevator music. When she came back, her voice had shifted from confused to carefully professional. I apologize for the confusion. I will need to contact the primary account holder to clarify the contact list. Is there a number where you can be reached? I gave her my cell, thanked her politely, hung up. The seed was planted. She would call Samuel or Victoria. They would have to explain. They would have to address a question that shouldn't exist if Samuel's story was true. I made the second call Friday morning to Morrison and Wells, Samuel's law firm. Haley Thornton, I told the receptionist, his wife. I'm calling to speak with Samuel Thornton regarding updates to spouse insurance benefits. Another pause. Shorter, but laced with uncertainty. Let me transfer you. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. I left a brief message, same pleasant tone, asking Samuel to call me back about insurance paperwork that needed his signature. Then I called back, asked the receptionist to leave him a note too. Just to confirm, you said you are his wife? Yes, that is correct. Haley Thornton. He should have my number in his contacts. I heard her typing. This would sit in his inbox, flagged as important, requiring explanation to anyone who saw it. People would ask questions. The fiction would develop small cracks. The third call went to Victoria's family office. Hi Jennifer, this is Haley Thornton. I'm calling about seating arrangements for the wedding this Saturday. I wanted to confirm where Samuel's wife should be seated during the ceremony. This pause was the longest yet. I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion. The seating chart shows Samuel Thornton as a single guest being seated with the groom's party. Are you a +1 who was added late? No, I am his wife. We've been married for several years, actually. Is there a problem with the seating arrangements? Let me pull up the guest list. Can you spell your last name? I spelled it carefully. The silence that followed told me exactly what she was finding. Nothing. I am not seeing your name on the guest list, Jennifer said, her professionalism cracking slightly. And the information we have shows Samuel as unmarried. Are you certain you have the correct wedding? Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford this Saturday at Riverside Manor. That is the wedding I'm asking about. Yes. But I really think there has been a mistake. Let me get your contact information, and I will have someone from the family reach out to you to clarify. I gave her my number, email, thanked her, and ended the call. 3 calls. 3 different sources of confusion, all landing in Samuel's world in the 72 hours before his wedding, each requiring explanation, each raising questions with no good answers. I made 2 more calls that afternoon. One to the florist listed on Victoria's Instagram, asking about delivery arrangements, mentioning I was Samuel's wife. One to Victoria's college roommate, leaving a voicemail congratulating her on being in the wedding party and introducing myself as someone who looked forward to meeting her at the ceremony. Each call was brief, professional, deliberately confusing. I wasn't lying. I was simply existing in spaces where Samuel had declared me non-existent, speaking truth into a narrative built entirely on fiction. The calls would generate conversations. People would mention them. The confusion would spread like ripples, reaching Samuel from multiple directions. I knew, from 3 years of marriage, that Samuel needed control over every detail of his image. These small disruptions would create anxiety he couldn't fully address, because addressing them meant either maintaining the lie or admitting the truth. Neither option gave him the control he craved. Saturday morning arrived, cool and clear. The kind of October day photographers love for outdoor ceremonies. I woke early, dressed carefully in the navy blue dress I'd originally planned to wear to his law school graduation, the one I dry cleaned for an occasion I was never allowed to attend. Minimal makeup, hair pulled back. I wanted to look presentable, unremarkable, like someone who belonged in professional spaces without drawing unnecessary attention. I drove to Riverside Manor slowly, taking back roads. The estate appeared at the end of a long driveway lined with oak trees. A restored Victorian mansion, surrounded by manicured gardens. Workers were already setting up. White chairs in perfect rows, floral arrangements near the arbor, a string quartet setting up, catering vans parked. I parked across the street in a small public lot, positioning my car with a clear view of the main entrance, but far enough away to avoid notice. I settled in with a bottle of water and a book, though I had no intention of reading. Guests began arriving around 11:30. Expensive cars, elegant dresses, tailored suits, air kisses. I watched Victoria's parents arrive in a black sedan, immediately surrounded by well-wishers. Samuel's law firm partners arrived together. At noon, Victoria arrived in a white limousine, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale pink. Even from across the street, she looked stunning, perfectly fit for this world of manicured lawns and crystal chandeliers. This was the woman Samuel had chosen to keep alive in his narrative, the one whose existence enhanced, rather than embarrassed him. Samuel arrived 15 minutes later. Seeing him after 8 months felt stranger than I expected. He looked successful, confident. A perfectly fitted tuxedo. Shaking hands, laughing with groomsmen I didn't recognize. He looked like someone who had never scrubbed floors or counted change for groceries. Someone who had always belonged in spaces like this. I checked my phone. No calls yet. But that would change soon. The wedding was at 1 o'clock. People were gathering, checking phones. The coordinator would be finalizing details. Jennifer from Victoria's family office would be managing logistics. The confusion I had planted was about to bloom into something larger. Something Samuel could not control. And I would watch it unfold from across the street. The dead wife, resurrecting herself just enough to crack the foundation of the beautiful lie he'd built. I settled deeper into my seat, waited for the truth to arrive like an uninvited guest. At 12:45, guests took their seats. The string quartet began ceremony music. Samuel appeared from a side entrance, walked toward the altar with his groomsmen.
Calm, composed.
Every inch the successful attorney marrying into a prominent legal family. I watched him take his position, checking his watch, exchanging words with the officiant. Guests settled. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. A perfect ceremony for a perfect couple.
Built on a perfect lie.
Then Samuel's phone rang. Even from across the street, I saw him stiffen. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, irritation flickering across his
face.
He declined the call, slipped it back into his pocket, said something to a groomsman that looked like an apology. 30 seconds later, it rang again. His frown deepened. He stared at the screen longer. I watched his jaw tighten his tell. Something was going wrong, but he was trying to maintain control. He declined again, but his composure had developed a crack. The phone rang a third time before he could put it away. Samuel stepped back from the altar, held up one finger to the officiant, asking for a moment. He answered the call, pressing the phone to his ear, his free hand going to his hip. I couldn't hear, but his body language screamed. Shoulders hunched. A sharp gesture with his hand. Growing tension. Whatever explanation he was giving wasn't satisfying the person on the other end. Guests in the front rows began turning, whispering. The officiant looked uncertain. A groomsman approached. Samuel waved him away. Then I saw Victoria's mother, Catherine Ashford. She stood up, phone pressed to her ear, her composed matriarch facade crumbling. She walked quickly towards the altar, her elegant dress unsuited for her pace. She reached Samuel as he was ending his call, immediately began speaking, gesturing at her own phone. Samuel shook his head, tried to explain. But Catherine's expression transformed from confused to suspicious. She kept pointing at her phone, her voice carrying across the lawn, demanding answers. Other guests were checking their phones. A ripple effect.
Confusion spreading.
The wedding coordinator appeared, practically running, tablet clutched in both hands. She reached Samuel and Catherine, trying to show them something on her screen, her mouth moving rapidly, trying to explain a situation that made no sense. One of Samuel's law firm partners, Richard Morrison, stood up. He walked to the front, the deliberate stride of someone accustomed to taking charge. He pulled out his own phone, showed Samuel something. Samuel's face was no longer just irritated. It was panicked. His hand ran through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. He was talking rapidly, gesturing with both hands, trying to explain to multiple people at once. But it wasn't working. More people kept approaching with phones and questions. The string quartet had stopped playing. The sudden silence made the chaos at the altar even more noticeable. Guests were standing, craning necks, whispering speculation that grew louder. Then I saw Victoria. She emerged from the manor in her wedding dress, bridesmaids around her. She was supposed to wait for her cue. But something had gone very wrong. She took 3 steps onto the lawn before she registered it. Her groom wasn't calmly waiting. She gathered her dress, walked quickly toward the cluster. Her face shifted from bridal joy to confusion, then to something harder. She reached Samuel, grabbed his arm, pulled him away. They stood face to face. Even from across the street, I saw the intensity of their conversation. Samuel tried to calm her, placating gestures. But Victoria wasn't having it. She stepped back, one hand flying to her mouth in shock. Her mother moved to her side. Samuel was surrounded by the two most important women in his fabricated life, both demanding answers he couldn't provide without destroying everything. Judge Ashford stood up from his seat, his expression grave. He approached the group with the measured pace of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. He said something brief to Samuel, and I watched Samuel's face drain of color. More phones were ringing. More guests checking messages. The wedding coordinator frantically typed on her tablet. Samuel's law firm partners clustered together, expressions ranging from concerned to professionally suspicious. Victoria's hand dropped from her mouth. She stared at Samuel with an expression I recognized. The look of someone watching a person they thought they knew transform into a stranger. Her mother had an arm around her, but Victoria seemed barely aware. I checked the time. 10 minutes had passed since the ceremony was supposed to start. 10 minutes of Samuel's carefully constructed world collapsing under the weight of simple truth. The dead wife calling about billing. The dead wife inquiring about insurance benefits. The dead wife asking about seating arrangements. Each call a small bomb detonating in his fiction, creating confusion that multiplied until it could no longer be contained. Samuel pulled out his phone again, appeared to be making a call himself, probably trying to reach me, trying to stop what was already in motion. But I had turned my phone off hours ago. There was nothing he could say that would put this back together. Judge Ashford was speaking to the officiant now. The ceremony was being delayed indefinitely. The judge turned to address the assembled guests, his voice carrying with authority. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw the reaction. Guests standing, confused conversations erupting, people gathering belongings. Victoria's bridesmaids had surrounded her. I watched her turn away from Samuel, walk back towards the manor with her mother, forming a barrier between her and the man she'd been about to marry. Samuel tried to follow, but Judge Ashford put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. The two men stood, having a very serious conversation, while the wedding dissolved around them. I had seen enough. The truth had done its work, creating exactly the kind of chaos that couldn't be smoothed over with explanations. Samuel would have to choose now. Admit he had lied about my death, or construct even more elaborate lies. Either choice would cost him something significant. His credibility. His relationship with Victoria.
His standing at the law firm.
I started my car, pulled slowly out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I saw the scene continuing. Guests streaming towards cars, clustering in confused groups. The wedding coordinator standing alone, staring at her tablet like it might contain answers. Samuel still talking with Judge Ashford, his gestures growing more desperate. The ghost he had tried to create had spoken from beyond the grave he dug. And the message was devastatingly simple. Asterisk, I'm still here. I exist. Asterisk and lies, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually collide with truth in ways that cannot be managed or controlled. I drove back towards the city, slowly, taking the scenic route. Children playing in yards, people washing cars, couples walking dogs. Regular life continuing for people whose worlds hadn't just collapsed under the weight of fundamental deception. My phone stayed off. I didn't need to hear Samuel's explanations. I didn't need to witness the aftermath directly. I had done what I came to do. Not to destroy him, but simply to stop being dead. To exist loudly enough in the right spaces at the right time, so his fiction could no longer hold. The revenge I needed wasn't violence. It was just this. The truth, precisely deployed, allowed to spread through his world like cracks in ice. What happened next wasn't my concern. I had served my final notice. The waitress he dismissed as beneath his ambition had proven capable of serving him one last thing he could not send back or ignore. I was alive. Inconvenient. Unmarketable. Completely real. And that, finally, was enough. I drove home through the Saturday afternoon traffic, autumn sun filtering through the trees. My hands were steady on the wheel, my breathing calm. No adrenaline rush, no triumphant feeling. Just a quiet sense of completion, like closing a book after reading the last page. When I reached my studio apartment, I climbed the narrow stairs, unlocked the door. Everything was as I'd left it. My reading chair, the plants on the sill, the small table with its folded napkin. My space, my sanctuary, untouched by the chaos I'd created 30 miles away. I made tea, sat by the window. Normal life continued below. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small earthquake I'd triggered in Samuel Thornton's reality. My phone stayed off for the rest of the weekend. I didn't need to know. I didn't need Samuel's attempts to spin the situation. The truth had been deployed, and truth has its own momentum once released. Sunday, I worked my regular shift at Riverside Diner. Maria raised an eyebrow when I walked in, studying my face. "You look different," she said while we set up the coffee station. "Something happened?" "I took care of something I needed to handle," I replied. "That's all." She nodded slowly, understanding. We worked in comfortable rhythm. Monday morning, I finally turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls from Samuel. A dozen texts, from confused to angry to pleading. 3 voicemails I deleted without listening. I blocked his number and went about my day. Nothing had changed except the weight I no longer carried. Tuesday afternoon, Emma called. "So, I heard some interesting gossip," she said without preamble, about a certain wedding that apparently went sideways this weekend. "Did it now?" I said, reorganizing cans in the diner storage closet. My friend Jennifer, a paralegal, was invited to the Thornton Ashford wedding. She said it was the most awkward ceremony she's ever attended. Delayed by almost half an hour because the groom was getting calls and messages about his dead wife, who turned out to be not so dead after all. "Sounds complicated," I offered neutrally. Jennifer said Victoria was in tears. The judge looked ready to call the whole thing off, and half the guests were on their phones trying to figure out what was happening. The ceremony eventually went forward, but the reception was tense. And now people are talking. Law firms love gossip, and a story about someone faking a spouse's death for sympathy is exactly the kind of thing that spreads. Emma paused. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said. "But I'm not really interested in following up on any of it. What happens in Samuel's world is not my concern anymore." "Fair enough," Emma said. "I just thought you should know that whatever you did, it worked. People are asking questions he can't answer well." After we hung up, I finished organizing the closet. Samuel's world was cracking. What happened next was between him and the people he had deceived, none of whom were my responsibility to protect or inform. The weeks that followed settled into the familiar patterns of my rebuilt life. Morning shifts, afternoon walks, evenings reading or cooking simple meals. I had returned to the rhythm that sustained me. 3 days after the wedding, Emma forwarded a screenshot. Samuel and Victoria at their reception, smiling for the camera. But even through the filter, something looked wrong. The smiles were too tight. Victoria's eyes held no warmth. Samuel's hand on her waist looked more like obligation than affection. The caption, from one of Victoria's cousins, asked, "Why would someone lie about a spouse dying? What does that say about their character and integrity?" The comments were divided. Some defended Samuel, blaming a malicious ex. Others doubted his honesty. A few pointed out that multiple sources had received calls from his dead wife. I saved the screenshot. The mythology Samuel had built was developing cracks, and sunlight was getting into the fissures. What grew in those cracks was not my concern. I had simply planted truth in soil cultivated with lies. Nature would take its course. The months that followed brought changes to my life, unrelated to Samuel. In February, Frank, my boss at the diner, called me into his office. He offered me a promotion to assistant manager. Increased responsibility, better pay, regular hours. Actual weekends off for the first time in years. "You've earned this," Frank said, in his blunt way. "You show up, you work hard, you treat people with respect. That matters more than fancy credentials." Maria organized a small celebration. Devin made a card, everyone signed. These people had become my family. They saw me for who I actually was, valuing that person without reservation. The promotion felt more meaningful than any of Samuel's polished achievements because it was built on reality, not fiction. I wouldn't be featured in alumni magazines or celebrated at charity galas. But I had earned genuine respect from people whose opinions I actually valued. 6 months after the wedding that almost wasn't, Emma mentioned over coffee that Jennifer had heard updates through the legal community gossip network. Victoria's parents hired someone to investigate after the wedding disruptions, Emma said. They found out the truth about you. About how Samuel had been telling people you died when you were very much alive and paying half his rent. I sipped my coffee. The marriage went forward because calling it off would have been too embarrassing. But Jennifer says everyone knows it's strained. Victoria apparently feels betrayed on a fundamental level, which makes sense given that her husband built their entire relationship on a massive lie. That sounds difficult for her, I said, and I meant it. Victoria was a victim of Samuel's deception too. Also, Morrison and Wells apparently had some serious conversations about Samuel's character and judgment. They didn't fire him, but they're not fast-tracking him anymore either. The sympathetic widower narrative that helped him get hired has been replaced by questions about his integrity. I absorbed this with neutral attention. Samuel's professional reputation was becoming complicated. Truth, once released, shapes reality in ways no amount of careful image management can control. Does that feel satisfying? Emma asked. Knowing he's facing consequences? I considered the question. It feels complete, I said finally. I didn't do this to punish him or to celebrate his struggles. I did it to stop being dead, to exist loudly enough that his fiction could not hold. What happens to him now is between him and the people he deceived. Emma nodded, understanding. I walked home through streets where spring was asserting itself. New leaves, flowers, and window boxes. The world renewing itself. I climbed the stairs to my studio apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped into the space. That was entirely, authentically mine. The truth had done its work. Samuel's carefully polished facade had developed cracks that would never fully repair. And I had stopped being the ghost he tried to create, reclaiming my existence through the simple act of refusing to stay buried in the grave he dug with lies. That was enough. That was everything. The calendar notification popped up on my phone in late October, a full year after Samuel had told me not to come to his graduation. The reminder read simply, anniversary. 6 years since we'd stood in that courthouse, believing we were starting something that would last. I stared at it, then dismissed it. But the date lingered throughout my shift at the diner. After work, I did something I'd never done. I made a reservation at Marcellus, an Italian restaurant downtown. I'd walked past it countless times, but the prices were always more than I spent on groceries for a week. But I'd received my first paycheck as assistant manager. This anniversary deserved acknowledgement. Not as mourning for what was lost, but as a celebration for what I had survived and rebuilt. The hostess seated me at a table by the window as evening settled. The restaurant was elegant, understated. White tablecloths, soft lighting. I felt briefly self-conscious sitting alone, but I pushed it aside. This evening was mine, earned through resilience and the quiet work of rebuilding a life from materials I thought had been destroyed. I ordered wine that cost more per glass than Samuel, and I used to spend on entire bottles. I held the glass up to the light, watched the deep red refract the candlelight. The first sip was rich, complex. This was what quality tasted like when you could finally afford it through your own honest work. The server brought the chef's special, a pasta dish with ingredients I couldn't have pronounced a year ago, but that I'd learned to appreciate. The presentation was beautiful, each element arranged with care. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling completely whole in a way I'd never felt, even during the years Samuel and I were married. There was no one across from me making dismissive comments about my lack of sophistication or my working-class tastes. No one measuring my worth against people from better families. No one treating my presence as something to be hidden. Just me, alone at a table by the window, present in my own life, without apology or shame. Between courses, I watched the city lights come on. People walked past, a couple holding hands, a group of friends laughing, a woman walking alone with confident strides. All living their own stories. I thought about Samuel, probably dining with Victoria in an equally nice restaurant or nicer. I wondered if he ever thought about this anniversary, if he remembered the date, or if he'd successfully erased it. I wondered if Victoria knew that today marked 6 years since he'd married someone he would later declare dead for convenience. But those thoughts came without the sharp edge of pain they once carried. Samuel's life was his own now, contaminated by lies he would have to manage indefinitely, but no longer connected to mine in any meaningful way. Whatever difficulties he faced were consequences of his own choices. And I had no obligation to care. The server brought dessert, a small masterpiece of chocolate and cream. Too beautiful to eat, but it tasted even better. I savored it, finishing my wine, grateful for this moment, this meal, this life I had built from the ruins. Understanding settled over me. Being erased from someone's story doesn't mean you cease to exist. It only means you exist outside the boundaries of their narrative, free to write your own story, using your own words and your own truth. Samuel had tried to make me invisible, but erasure only works if you cooperate with it. If you accept the judgment that you are not worth remembering. I had refused. Not through dramatic confrontation, but through the simple act of existing loudly enough to crack the foundation of lies he had built. The waitress he dismissed had proven capable of serving him one final order he could not decline.
Truth.
Delivered with precision. I paid the check, leaving a generous tip. As I gathered my coat, I caught my reflection in the darkened window. The woman looking back was not the person I had been a year ago, broken and confused in Emma's guest room. She was not the person I had been 3 years ago, shrinking herself to fit Samuel's ambitions. This woman was Haley Brennan, assistant manager at Riverside Diner, survivor of betrayal, who had learned that being dismissed is not the same as being dismissible. I had scars, but I also had clarity about my worth that came from being valued by good people. The studio apartment above the bookstore waited. I climbed the stairs, unlocked the door. The reading chair, the small table, the plants I had kept alive. Everything in this apartment carried meaning. This was not performance. This was just living.
Honest.
Modest. Completely real. The life I had built was not glamorous, but it was solid in ways that fiction could never be. I made tea, sat in my reading chair. Samuel had tried to write me out of his story, to erase me so completely that I became nothing more than a tragic footnote. But stories have a way of asserting their own logic. His story would always be contaminated by the lie at its center. My story was different. It was clean, built on survival and the quiet power of continuing to exist despite someone else's determination to erase me. It was not a story people would tell at networking events. It was just mine. Honest. Hard won. And sufficient. I raised my teacup to my reflection. A small toast to the woman I had become. Not the ghost Samuel tried to create, but someone solid and present and whole. Someone who had learned that the best revenge is not destruction or punishment, but simply refusing to disappear. Simply continuing to exist with dignity and honesty while the lies collapse under their own weight. The evenings stretched ahead. I could read, cook, or simply sit here, watching the city lights, feeling grateful for this ordinary, extraordinary life. Tomorrow, I would work my shift at the diner. I would pour coffee, clear plates, exchange easy conversation with people who valued my presence. I would come home to this apartment, these routines, this quiet satisfaction that came from building something real. That was enough. That was everything. The ghost had learned to live again. Not by haunting the person who tried to kill her off, but by claiming her own space in the world and refusing to be anything other than fully, completely, inconveniently alive. If this story of truth serving justice had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Samuel's phone started ringing at the altar and his perfect facade began crumbling in real time. What was your favorite moment? Or have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone who tried to diminish you? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know. And don't miss more compelling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.